Morning.
Daniela, shall we start? It's 9.
Yes, somebody was playing. Please turn off your microphones when you're not speaking. Thank you so much. And we will start. So welcome and good morning on this special and sad day. We discussed if we shall do this event anyway, and we decided to proceed and to do so because we think information is essential. Hello, please mute yourself when you are not talking. Thank you so much. Yes, good morning. Good morning, particularly to our speakers, but also, of course, to our audience. My name is Daniela Klaus. I'm the General Secretary of Policy Club Concordia. I'm greeting you from Vienna here in the center of Europe. Since 1859, Concordia advocates for press freedom, and democracy is, of course, at the heart of our mission, because we are talking for the free media. Today, we are talking about the elections in Hungary, which is a very important issue. The event is one of our ongoing series with the name Europe's Contexts. This series is sponsored by Erste Stiftung, Erste Foundation, and a cooperation between the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna, IWM, FIUM, Forum for Journalism and Media, which is an institution for journalism training, and Presse Club Concordia. The series, as many other events here, are authored and organized by Miljana Tomic. Welcome, Miljana. It is so important to get all this information and this excellent network you are building up here. And I will hand over the word to you in a moment. There's just one important hint. This event is also live streamed and recorded. So when you are talking and when we see your camera, it will be recorded and published on YouTube. We will also send and provide this video to everybody after the event, so you can rewatch and share. So that's it from my side. Miljana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Good morning, everybody. As I say, on this very sad morning for Europe. And usually I am the organizer and the developer of programs, but today I have to say it was Zsuzsanna Szelenyi. It was her excellent idea that we should do this background event on the elections in Hungary to understand beyond the headlines and to understand and a special event for those journalists and academics who will be following the elections that are important for Hungarians, but also for Europe, to know what to pay attention to. So this time I shall be very brief because Zsuzsanna, excuse me, will be introducing the speakers and the main topics. Of course, we have an elephant in the room, which is a war that started, and I'm sure that many of our speakers may wish to comment how the war that started is affecting or may affect the elections. I shall just say one sentence. We have divided this event into 3 topics. So Zsuzsanna Szelenyi will give an overview, and by the way, in the chat we shall put the CVs of all of our speakers, including Zsuzsanna, so that we don't have to spend time on that. So we have 3 topics: the internal impact of the elections, what matters to the Hungarians who are going to vote, what is being discussed. Second, it is well known that media is controlled in Hungary, so what is at stake with media, in a sense, like how can the opposition reach their voters, and if there is a change in power, will it affect the media? And last but not least, what the impact on Europe, Hungary or Budapest or Orbán and Brussels, what can change or not change depending on the outcome, and Russia and the war that is here. Zsuzsanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning for everyone. This is indeed a very puzzling morning to speak about Hungary, but anyway, we try to do. So the Hungarian election will be held on 3rd April this year. Hungarian elections are an interesting issue since 2010, but probably for most Europeans, it's the over 2015 period when a larger international public understood that something in Hungary is happening, which is different than how Europe looks like and how Hungary actually developed itself over the years. So I don't go into historical details because I know that many of you are very well informed about Hungary. I just would like to say that there are a couple of new things compared to the 4 years ago elections, which were in 2018, and when Viktor Orbán's party Fidesz gained third time in a row supermajority, meaning a constitutional majority in the Hungarian parliament, providing the ever largest power to a European government since the war. So this is now the fourth election since 2010. And there are a couple of things which have changed since the last elections. The first thing is that the political scene is rather different. You may remember that 4 years ago, a huge anti-migration, anti-liberal, anti-European campaign was happening by using state resourcing by the governing party. This is definitely not the case this time. There are more shaky economic situations in these days due to the pandemic and the last couple of years, which was definitely not something Fidesz on government expected. The inflation is quite high in Hungary. It's 8% at the moment. A year ago, it was 3.5%, and the government had to transfer to the Hungarian public a large amount of money in the last couple of months. It's something like 15% of the entire GDP went to the population in the last couple of months in order to smooth the situation and maintain the well-being of people. So that's definitely, obviously, this was a targeted support, so that was already preparing for the elections from the governing party. The other thing is that the COVID crisis itself, this was mainly realized as a kind of fine management by the government, but we never really know how the lots of personal situations has changed over the time and how this changed the people's relationship to government, even Fidesz voters. And probably the largest change is that Hungary has a very majoritarian election system, which made it possible for the governing party to gain this high majority in parliament, even though in the last two elections they didn't reach the half of the popular votes, because the opposition was fragmented. At the moment, 6 parties are sitting in the parliament, and there are plenty of independent MPs. So now 6 of these 6 parties basically joined and ran together in a one big list. Plus, in each electoral district, they all together run one candidate. This can mathematically change the situation. And this means that there will be one opposition party vis-a-vis Fidesz. Obviously, smaller parties are existing and are multiplying, but basically, this created a shift in the political scene, especially that the Jobbik, the right-wing party, joined the liberal, green, and socialist, social democrat opposition. So it's Fidesz and the opposition bloc which is now facing each other. That's a very big change. Opposition parties, though there are plenty of discussions and debates among themselves, are running together and headed by a prime minister candidate, Peter Márki-Zay, who was elected at a primary in September last year. So that's basically I wanted to say as a kind of preparation, because our speakers will tell much more for you. First of all, I'd like to ask Dániel Mikecz, a political scientist, fellow of the Political Science Institute at the Hungarian Academy of Sciences and research fellow at the Republikon Institute, to speak in more details about the political developments in the last couple of weeks. Dániel is also an expert in studying movement and new movements, so you can learn a lot from him. Ágnes Urbán is an economist and media expert. Beyond teaching at the University of Corvinus, she is a founder and key researcher of the Mikecz Media Monitor organization. It's an NGO which creates high-level monitoring of following developments of the media market, regulations, and content. And she can tell you more about what's the opposition's approach and hopes vis-a-vis the Hungarian media. And finally, Botond Feledy is a foreign affairs specialist, senior fellow of the Center of European Integration and Development, CEID, and research. And Botond has been working at the European Parliament years ago and is living in Brussels at the moment. And he will tell you more about how Hungary's changing relationship with the European Union means, what this election might mean for Europe and for neighboring countries and for Hungary's allies. And most probably, Botond will also speak how the crisis in Ukraine, actually the war in Ukraine that just escalated today, will have, I don't know if the election, whether you can speak about that, Botond, you will see, but definitely it's something which is interesting, because Hungary in the last couple of years had a very special and straight relationship both to Russia and Ukraine. So it is a new situation for the Hungarian government. So I would like to pass the floor now to you, and I think probably first Dániel to speak a bit more on the Hungarian political landscape.
Thank you very much, Zsuzsanna. Thank you, Mirjana, for having me. I'm going to talk about internet issues, but at this time, I think it's also inevitable to talk about the impact of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, and what kind of internal consequences this conflict might have. But I would want going to discuss international politics, just the domestic, the internal impact of this conflict. I don't know if I'm sharp enough. Sorry, I just might change my camera a bit. Okay, so I was asked by Mirjana to talk about the agenda, the political agenda in Hungary, and what actually the people are talking about. What are actually the important issues Hungarian people, the Hungarian voters, are interested in. And I am lucky enough to I just received some opinion poll data yesterday, where there was a question about what people are discussing with family members, with friends. What are actually the political issues they are discussing? Because as a matter of fact, it's what people see on social media, what you can read in the news, that could be quite different what actually people are really talking about. And the most important issue are salaries, pensions. So basically the income of the people, this is what they are talking about, but probably this is what we're talking about independently from any kind of government or political parties. This is actually when it comes to politics, so to say, then people talking about the income, which is actually quite important in the light of the welfare measures of the Fidesz, but I'm going to come back to that. They also discuss the pandemic, COVID-19, which is actually when at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw in the data that people care much more about public issues. The news portals had more readership, so people, of course, are interested in this development, which is now probably not the case, but they're still discussing the pandemic and related issues like vaccination or lockdown measures, which are also important for the public. Also, Zsuzsanna mentioned the inflation and the prices. It is also an issue for many people. And also, they're also discussing the welfare measures, directly the welfare measures, which have been introduced by the Fidesz government. So the Fidesz raised the pensions, so they are giving now a 13th month of pension for retired people. They also introduced the people under 25, they don't have to pay income tax, which is not as discussed as the pension. So there's probably actually more pensions than people who are liable to be income tax free under 25. And also when it comes to the inflation, the Fidesz government, they freeze the prices of some basic foods like flour, milk, chicken breast. And this is what actually the people are also discussing. But as a matter of fact, and also the Fidesz government, they have frozen the price of gas. But still, in the same opinion poll data, we see that when it comes to the competency, when it comes to policy competencies of the government and of the opposition, and to have the competency to govern, to have a good governance in some policy fields, then surprisingly, the opposition is not worse than the government. In some policy areas, like environmental policies, or just to decrease income inequality, or ease social tensions between people, or when it comes to the inflation, then voters, even from single mandate districts, which are traditionally more right-wing, or there are more pro-Fidesz voters, they see the opposition as having more competency on these policy fields, which is actually, it was quite surprising for me. And probably we are going to publish such an analysis in the upcoming weeks, because as a matter of fact, it was always discussed that there's a lack of competency on the side of the opposition, that more people tend to see the Fidesz and the government as more competent to govern the country. But in the light of this data, it is actually just not true. So this is what when I was talking about the differences, what we get some kind of insights from social media, from all bubbles, or what we have from the news agenda, and what actually opinion leaders have been discussing, that there's a lack of not just leadership, but there's a lack of policy competencies. From the side of voters, it's not totally true. And as a matter of fact, there are bigger differences between the opposition and the government in policy fields like inflation and decreasing income inequality for the benefit of the opposition. So I think it's quite interesting. And when it comes to the fact that people are discussing inflation, and for a lot of people, for a lot of voters, the opposition seems to be more competent in in managing inflation, that it means it creates an opportunity for the opposition. So this is one thing that policy competencies are not are different from the voters' perspective as from the perspective of opinion leaders. Another thing I think which is important when it comes to the agenda, of course, politicians aim to influence the political agenda, what people are discussing, what are the hot topics, that some, so to say, scandals which has been inflated by the government, by Fidesz, and there's been some accusations that the left-wing mayor of Budapest, Gergely Karácsony, wishes to sell the town hall. People do not discuss these issues. So these are actually not on their personal agenda. It also demonstrates that there's a limit of spreading such news, that these accusations by the Fidesz, they don't have such a resonance as they could hope. Of course, when it comes to the political agenda, this offensive campaign from the side of Russia against the Ukraine, it creates a whole new situation. So people very probably, this is going to be one of the top issues they're going to discuss with their families, with their friends, and this leads to the internal impact of this war. The majority of Hungarians, they see Europe, Western Europe, and the Western allies as the natural allies of Hungary, and they see that actually Hungary belongs to the West. There's an old tradition of this debate in Hungary, which could lead back to the 19th century. Where's the place of Hungary? But not just for the opposition voters, but for the undecided voters, and for many Fidesz voters, they tend to see Western Europe and the West as the place of Hungary. And the question is, maybe you are aware of that the Fidesz government, they launched a new policy, a new foreign policy, and the right after came to power in 2010. Then they wanted to open to the east as well, but it might have a negative consequence now to the Orbán government, that for many Hungarians, they will see that at this time of war, this foreign policy of the Orbán government could threaten the Western integration of Hungary. At the same time, what we see in the recent days, that Orbán wishes to demonstrate strengths. He's posing with soldiers. He's visiting the barracks. And they're also saying that they're going to mobilize some troops on the eastern part of the country, and at the same time they want to demonstrate that they want peace, that the Orbán government wants peace, and they are standing alongside with the European Union, and they stand alongside with the common position of the European Union. The opposition doesn't have such opportunities. They can't pose with soldiers, so they cannot demonstrate directly this kind of strengths with the Orbán government, or what Viktor Orbán himself can do. But I think for undecided voters who has very similar political attitude and political opinion like the opposition voters, for these voters, this conflict might mobilize them on the side of the opposition, and some Fidesz voters could be also demobilized by this conflict. And just, I don't have how much time do I have, probably a couple of minutes, but which is also important if you look at the opinion poll data, that the majority of the Hungarians, of the voters, wish to change the government, but still Mikecz, prime minister candidate of the opposition, is less popular than Viktor Orbán, but the Fidesz is not as popular as Viktor Orbán. So this is why we see a personal campaign from Orbán. He himself visits Hungarian people, he visits the troops. It's not the Fidesz. We don't see even the Fidesz colors on these small ads or video clips or on these images. But even Mikecz is not as popular among the opposition voters as he should be, because he is actually the leader of the opposition. So there is some kind of lack of leadership or leadership problem on the side of the opposition. It's an interesting question if the upcoming days Viktor Orbán can strengthen his image as a competent leader, if his personal campaign is going to be more popular or not as Fidesz itself. And when it comes to the campaign, it's also important to note that now it seems that the Fidesz doesn't want to have a real campaign. They want to demonstrate that they're going to, they wish to govern a country. They wish to make things business as usual. It's a very similar situation like we had in 2002, when basically the Fidesz, they just wanted to demonstrate their competence and they wanted to win the election by saying that they have good results, they have good governance, and they really not, they didn't really had a political campaign. In 2002, they lost the election. So it is a good question if not to campaign is going to have more benefits for the Fidesz or not. And I think my 10 minutes is over, but any questions would be welcome. Thank you very much.
Just a comment. We shall have questions, after all three of you give the 10-minute presentation. We open for Q&A, and as usual, it's a live Q&A. Ágnes?
Thank you very much. I have few slides, and I promise it will be short, but oh no, I cannot share it. Okay, I can share it now because there are some brand names and some media, and it can be useful if you see this these names. Yeah, it is already okay. First of all, I would like to show some problem areas which are rather relevant in Hungary, and I don't go deeply in all of the problem areas, but I think it is rather useful to see an overall picture about the situation. The first big problem is that media market is not really a market in Hungary. I mean, concerning the fair competition, there is a very strong market distortion. On the one hand, because of the ownership structure, it is extremely concentrated, and I will tell you a little bit more about it later on. And the other problem is the market distortion of this so-called state advertising. There are a lot of data and analysis, and they all prove that state advertising distorts the market. State advertising means the advertising spending of the government itself and the different kind of state institutions, including the state-owned companies. Overall, it means a huge amount of money, and the spending of this money is really unbalanced. They practically go to the pro-government media. The other problem area, and I don't want to go into details right now, but it is important to see that we have a biased media authority. It is called Media Council. It has 5 members. All of the members were delegated by the ruling party, and you can imagine the decisions. Surprisingly, they always favor to the pro-government forces, for example, in the case of radio frequency tenders. The public service media is a very special problem. It can be the topic of another dedicated event because it is really something very important. Anyway, public service media became practically state media in Hungary, and it is the center of the pro-government propaganda in Hungary. And there is a problem with the access. There are segments in the society, especially elderly people in rural areas, who do not have internet access, or maybe they have internet access, but they have no awareness to use it in the right way and find balanced information. So basically, they are in a very special propaganda bubble. Concerning the concentration, I would like to mention the so-called Central European Press and Media Foundation. In Hungarian, it is simply called KESMA or KESMA. It was created 4 years ago, and it was a very special story because 10 different media owners, theoretically they were private owners, offered their companies to this new foundation. They offered their companies for free, just like a kind of donation. And it is easy to realize that they were not real investors. They were political investors and political actors. Otherwise, real investors never donate their companies, and especially not 10 different owners on the very same day. Almost 500 media brands became part of the KESMA, and it is important to know that the country newspaper market became a monopoly market. All of the country newspapers are part of the KESMA. It is the reason why I mentioned elderly people in rural areas. Typically, they are the readers of the country newspapers. But it is also important to mention the Origo. It was a famous news portal, and it is still a famous news portal, but it is not a quality one anymore. There is also monopoly market in the national commercial radio segment. There is only one player in this segment, Retro Radio. It is also owned by KESMA. Of course, it is a music radio, but the news in every hour can reach a high audience. There is a well-known television news channel, the so-called Hír TV. It is also part of the media empire, of this media empire. And there are several newspapers and magazines. I cannot list all of them, but the Magyar Nemzet is a famous right-wing news portal. There are several tabloid newspapers, just like Ripost, maybe it is the most well-known, and Metro is a free newspaper. So this KESMA has an incredible big portfolio. And it is also important to mention that there was a government decree after this very special acquisition of KESMA, and it is called a kind of national strategic importance merger. So neither the competition authority nor the media council were not allowed to examine this transaction. And a few words about the independent media, because interestingly, we still have a small but flourishing independent media market. They try to survive in this very difficult market environment. On the one hand, there are business model challenges because of the big digital platforms. On the other hand, there is a very special Hungarian market environment. The crowdfunding and the individual donations are more and more important in the independent media segment. And the independent media is typically available as online service. So in the very costly traditional media segments, it is not really possible to find a sustainable business model. So basically the independent sources are online sources. There are some special cases, for example, the RTL Club, which is an independent television owned by the international RTL group, owned by the Bertelsmann. But it is a commercial channel, not a political or a news channel. So it is a real commercial channel, but it has a daily news program with high audience rate. And there are some political weeklies, print political weeklies, but they have low circulation. Honestly, they are basically read by some Budapest intellectuals, but they cannot reach wide audience. So basically, the online market segment is the only one where independent voices are available, and it is not easy for them to find a sustainable business model, and there are other problems, and it means the working conditions for the journalists. They do not get information from state institutions and government politicians. They do not get interviews. They do not get data if they send a data request based on the Freedom of Information Act. So it is absolutely difficult today to be independent journalists. But it is a good news that there are innovative business models and innovative projects. It was to know that there is a special print it yourself movement. There are already articles in the international media about this movement. It is something very interesting because there is an edited leaflet every week and anyone can print it at home. And if they put it to the physical mailboxes of other people, especially in rural areas, it can provide somehow balanced information without propaganda. It is something very anachronistic, but it is more and more popular. And there is a famous political YouTube channel, Partisan, which is more and more popular. And last but not least, it would be useful to say something about the future, but I have no idea about the future. The situation is very uncertain. Of course, we don't know who will be the winner of the election, and the number of seats will be especially important. I cannot imagine that constitutional majority is possible, neither side. but the media law modification requires constitutional majority. So it will be especially difficult to do something with the public service media or with the media authority. The only good news is that commercial pro-government propaganda media can relatively easily disappear from the market because they are financed by state sources today. If they do not get state sources in the future, they will be hardly sustainable in financial sense. So I think many of the propaganda brands will disappear after the election, and it is so it doesn't require supermajority, or it doesn't require any change in the media law. Thanks for that, and I hope there will be further questions, and I can go into details. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ágnes. Botond, you wrote to me this morning asking if we should still do this event or not. Why? And please, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, and I'm also greeting everyone in this excellent call. And otherwise, I would be extremely grateful for the chance to talk about on a quality background on the Hungarian elections to you, to Zsuzsa, and those organizing the event. Of course, since 5 o'clock, my phone is ringing, and I have been receiving calls, messages, contacting the Ukrainian friends, and trying to oversee the situation, which is, I guess, became extremely difficult to understand what exactly happens on the ground for the last 48 hours, as the open source intelligence sources are getting depleted. Anyway, this is also allowing me to talk about Hungarian foreign policy in a special context. It's not only a watershed moment for Europe and the future of Europe and how the European security structures will be shaped by the war. Of course, today I'm emotional, and I'm in advance excusing myself for that. At the same time, I'm trying to keep myself very realistic, and well, we can expect some meetings, some sanctions, some announcements, but no one is talking about Hungarian troops going to Ukraine, except the Hungarian Prime Minister candidate, Mikecz, who mentioned if NATO ever would allow it, Hungarians would join under his eventual leadership from April on. So that's something which is now seemingly taking the Hungarian foreign policy orientations of the government and the opposition apart. This is very interesting, and I guess I will need to watch the Hungarian foreign ministry talking in the next days. What exactly is the stance of Hungarians? So far, we have understood that the government is trying to stay out, as they said it, from the war conflict, which is as a NATO member most probably impossible. So here is my hypothesis. I want to talk about 5 things this morning. One of them being Russia, the other is the RRF fund, China, Hungarian minorities, and the potential of the Hungarian foreign ministry and its capabilities. That will be my very short, hopefully less than 10 minutes expose. So, talking about Russia, my expectation has been that the Hungarian government would follow, even after the elections, Germany, as long as Germany is soft enough with Russia. Now the situation has been changed by the sanctions on Nord Stream 2, and the expectation that potentially, despite the new German government being openly and more critical with the Hungarian government, it's difficult to imagine how they would approach. But I guess that would be the objective of Prime Minister Orbán staying Prime Minister after April, to try to get in the backyard of the new German government through the so-called Putin-Versteher approach, trying to lame this conflict and somehow highlighting the energy needs of Europe and trying to stay on the diplomatic tracks, as they said it this morning. So shall the Germans stay also on this track? Then I guess Hungarians will have a sort of a chance, the Fidesz government might have a chance to even befriend the new German government. That's a hypothesis. Secondly, I would say that it is likely that the Russia policy of all Hungarian governments have been overtly or less overtly, but engaging with Russia in the last 20 years. So there was no Hungarian government being openly anti-Russian since 2002. That means that the Hungarian coalition partners of a potential opposition government have been pro-Russian before 2010, especially the socialists. So I'm not 100% buying in the narratives that whether there would be a radical change or not. Of course, the war is, in this understanding, a moment of choice. I would say a moment of grace. On the one hand, it would allow the Orbán government to exit the pro-Russian policy without a loss of face, because war is covering a cloud for the government to stay on a more Polish, more US-friendly track. That would allow them, secondly, to reconstruct the V4, which has been seriously undermined by the difference and the huge gap of perception of the Russian threat between Warsaw and Budapest. So it is becoming a balance that is not anymore so uneven, because if even the Fidesz governments after April would see the chance of a Polish rapprochement, of aligning more with US interest in the military sense, that would give them leverage also in other efforts, while Russia will be certainly isolated by the Western forces. So this is a moment of grace, despite the war, for the government to potentially exit after the elections this course of being friendly with Russia. Secondly, I would say that the question of the reconstruction fund is cardinal. Whether and how, in large part, has it already been earmarked in the Hungarian budget, I would say that this is a very huge issue for the opposition, because even if an opposition government would come in, they would find that the money shall that be granted upon a government change with the investigations required by the European Commission, that money has been already earmarked. It is possible to change it, but that would be another hurdle for a quick and swift action of an opposition government. While for the Orbán government, I guess it is showing its intention that after April, it would drive to a sort of a conciliation with the Commission and, of course, try to get the funds despite the court decision the last week. Thirdly, talking about China, I guess this is the point where it's the most clear is the difference between the two sides. So Orbán government staying on a pro-China track, most probably even after the election, while the opposition government has been making a campaign issue out of the anti-China stance, naming streets, going after the government in these issues. And I guess it is a logical and rational decision by the opposition, because they would not really receive much from a pro-China stance. And it is also rallying the electorate around, especially the young people. I can explain later if there will be questions. My fourth point, the capabilities of the Hungarian foreign ministry and foreign decision-making structures. This is a point on which it's hard to gather proved data, but as I have been working in this field for more than a decade, here is my hypothesis. Shall there be an opposition government after April, it will be for them extremely difficult to replace the decision-making points by a capable new human resource in a short time. That means that there is no full second line in Hungary who would take a very different approach and could sit into the foreign policy, to the embassies in a few months' time span. Having that said, it means that it would take huge amounts of energy and investment of political attention to sort of, as they sometimes say, purge the foreign ministry. So this is something which is an extremely critical point. It is not much talked about. and we can expect that the political parties of the opposition wouldn't agree very easily on those. They already have differences amongst them, and it's for me not clear which party would potentially take the seat of the foreign ministry after all, and I guess the war might influence this as well. The second aspect of the human resources is the state capture potential of the government-friendly oligarchs who are in business with the Chinese and Russian oligarchs or state. That's something that we need to discover in depth, and this is also giving a hurdle in front of any momentum coming to change foreign policy courses. At last, my point is that definitely there would be a difference in the approach to the Hungarian minorities living abroad in the neighboring countries. The Fidesz government has been openly investing money under different legal entities and government funds, buying up land, real estate, investing in startups and other sorts of enterprises in all of the neighboring countries with Hungarian minorities. I expect this to halt or to come to a much slower phase, and that the money flow towards these territories, Hungarian population, would be seriously considered by an opposition government. That is also in line with the last 12 years, where, of course, the Fidesz government is also expecting in return electoral support from the population of those territories, as they have the chance to claim Hungarian citizenship and vote in the upcoming elections, even if their vote is not potentially has been the influential one in the last 3 elections. So there are many alternatives coming up on this road. The war is exacerbating these alternatives. It is in some ways offering a month and a half to clarify some of the positions between the opposition parties, as much as it is also capable to make it much more visible what's the difference between the China, EU and Russia stance of the government and the opposition, as it will be necessarily expressed in the coming days and weeks in all the media that we are following. That would be from my side, the 5 points that I wanted to cover. Thank you very much, and ready for the questions. We continue.
Thank you so much, Botond. Agnes, okay. Zsuzsa, first of all, I open the floor to questions, and just raise your hand, and you can ask a question live. That's one thing. And the other thing is, Zsuzsa, would you like to make a comment at the end of these 3 presentations? Because I see you've been taking notes. And unmute yourself, please.
I think I actually would like the journalists to ask the questions. I'm happy to come in. The 3 presentations had different nature. Maybe I just would like to say that just add one thing to Ágnes, referring to the campaign and campaign spendings, because we actually see something new from the government recently, is that involving themselves more on social media. Social media was in the previous elections the dominant way how the opposition communicated to people, because they just didn't have access to many other more formal media. This has changed now, and though we are in the first quarter of the campaign, we already see the extraordinary difference between spending, especially on Facebook. So the government and the government-related media invest a huge, very segmented media advertisement. Obviously, the opposition is doing the same, but in a much lower level, since they just have much less money. So this is something. It's really difficult to see what kind of results this can be done. Fidesz has always been very good in segmenting advertisements. So this is an interesting and very unseeable thing. And just one information which somehow was not mentioned is that why this setup, the government and the opposition combined or united is interesting, is that the two blocs have approximately traditionally similar number of voters. So last time Fidesz got 2.6 million votes. All the oppositions, if we count them together, they got 2.8 million votes, but they were all fragmented, so it didn't really was united. So, and it's very stable. So for many years, somehow Fidesz and the opposition has approximately similar number of voters, and a lot of things are happening or depending on how and who can mobilize voters, their own voters, their voting tribes, if I can say so, and also voters who might go to vote or maybe not. And this is why this leadership issue, what Dániel articulated, is really interesting. Who can mobilize the undecided voters? Like, this is a question in many other election cases, but it's specifically very important at this time in Hungary.
Thank you, Zsuzsa. Are there any questions, or shall I ask the question? I don't see, are there any, or everyone is looking at the news about Russia and the war and listening about Hungary. But as a former war reporter, I can tell you there is really not much that you can learn today. It takes time to learn, and there will be lots of lies. So I don't see questions. I'll ask Dániel a question. He said something that is very interesting, and that is that the Hungarian, that Orbán is using, and maybe the opposition as well, the war for self-promotion by going to, with the army, to have pictures taken with the army, etc., etc. Could you comment on that? Do you think that this war, as long as it doesn't approach Hungarian borders, which it might, do you think it will be used for, for strengthening different positions?
Yes, I think so. So for the opposition, it's a more complicated issue, because how can they demonstrate strengths and actually the aim for peace at the same time? Viktor Orbán can do that because he can actually, as I mentioned, he can pose with the soldiers. But there is another issue which is, I think, very important from this aspect. What about migration, or what about refugees? Because the main framing of Fidesz, when it comes to, they don't talk about refugees, they talk about migration. When it comes to migration, those are the others, these people. They have a different religion. They have a different skin tone. So they were always framed as the others, and that Hungary defends Europe from these others. But what about the migration? When it comes to ethnic Hungarians living in the Ukrainians, they cannot be really framed or interpreted as the others. It also means that the whole concept of migration, or the Fidesz concept of migration, is going to be, this concept is going to be hurt by these recent developments. So it cannot be maintained as it was maintained earlier. And Viktor Orbán, he talked about a migration pressure which might follow this conflict. But actually, at this point, it is not possible to frame migration as they did in 2015 and after 2015, something which was orchestrated by George Soros and by the opposition and by Brussels elites. So this is actually, I think, something new. And while he can demonstrate strengths and he can demonstrate that they are with the troops, they have to do something. They have to say something about this kind of migration. it is very possible that because actually this war happens in a neighboring country, in a country where there's a lot of ethnic Hungarians, the Hungarian public won't perceive this conflict and the upcoming migration as they did in 2015. So,
excuse me, just a question. Can you tell us how big is the Hungarian minority in Ukraine?
It's about, correct me, Zsuzsanna, if I'm wrong, but I think it's about 250,000 ethnic Hungarians are living at the border region of the Ukraine. So, and I think it's going to trigger different emotions and different reactions from the public as it did in 2015. And when it comes to the war, this is one thing which is, I think, well, a political, or let's say this is a challenge of interpretation for the Fidesz. What the opposition, what they can do, it was mentioned by Botond that the opposition, the prime minister candidate of the oppositions, said something about intervening with the NATO together, which is actually Viktor Orbán wishes to contrast their position with this. Well, it was not a program, or it was what actually Mikecz said, but since it is now Peter Mikecz says different things, and then he should excuse himself. Somehow, I think the voters are used to the fact that this prime minister candidate is not very coherent when it comes to statement. So I don't think that this statement, what he did about intervening in the Ukraine, is going to have such a resonance as maybe the Fidesz wishes. But all in all, I think from this perspective, how the political process, how the candidates can use, how they can utilize this conflict for their own benefit. While Viktor Orbán has more opportunities to do that, I think at the same time, all in all, it's going to cause more trouble for the Fidesz as an opportunity.
And just a follow-up, very short question, then I have questions for the others. Is Hungary preparing for refugee flow?
There was a photo which was leaked in the media today. That there was a presentation which was held in this war chamber of the Prime Minister, and there was a slide where it stood that they approximately 600,000 refugees might come to
600,000.
Yeah, 600,000 refugees, which of course the government and the military and the police and so on, they have to prepare for this, for the influx of refugees. So, and very probably it's going to be an issue in the upcoming weeks. And Viktor Orbán himself, once again, when he talked about the migration after the war, it was not framed as Hungary is ready to be a good host for the refugees, but it was framed very similarly as they framed the refugee crisis in 2015.
Thank you very much. Zsuzsanna, unmute yourself.
Yeah, just if there is no more questions at the moment. So the war poses opportunity for both the government and the opposition, I believe. We don't exactly know yet what the opposition position, there are so many of them, they have to discuss. And as you said, it takes some time. The government represents a couple of messages already, as was mentioned by Dániel and Botond. First of all, that they say all the time that we have to stay out from this war, so the kind of neutrality. The other thing is that very strongly comes out that Orbán is telling that the Hungarian army is protecting Hungary and the government is protecting Hungarians at any price. I think this morning already Szijjártó the Minister of Foreign Affairs made a comment on this. So that is what their way is, and I find it very interesting what Botond, you said about how the Orbán government might serve in the background German interests, say, speaking up on certain issues that the Germans might not want and Hungary can represent. And this is a tactic Hungary and Orbán government has used with Germany in the previous years extensively. But the opposition also has a room in this crisis, because they can say that we have to help the Ukrainians. They are Hungarians, so we have to stand by the Ukrainians, where we also have Hungarians. They are our neighbors. They are the victim of this war anyway. So there is a moral element which I think the opposition can use very well. They can also say and come up with that if there are migrants or refugees, that we have to be open to these refugees. Actually, I heard the Minister of Defense saying that the troops moved to the border area are actually preparing for receiving refugees. So they do it, but they don't speak about that very loudly because of this confusing behavior of the government vis-a-vis refugees in previous years. So there's a lot of things that the opposition can say. They can also say that we have to open our gas reserves to our European partners, which might suffer from gas shortage, while Hungary has a lot of gas. And I think Orbán consciously was filling up these huge gas reserves from Russian sources in the previous months. So we do have opportunities in this war, and there is moral arguments to say, and this is on the side of the opposition. So we really have to see in the coming weeks how they behave, how unified the opposition will be. They can actually demonstrate something better than what they did so far. So these are the war can be an issue in this campaign.
Thank you, Teresa. Before I give, my colleague is telling me that we normally don't take questions for YouTube. We only, anyway, there is a question here. What will happen if Mr. Orbán, against all wishful thinking, is going to win by exactly the votes which he needs for his absolute majority? It would demolish the opposition for years. Chances are given. Who would like to reply to that? Dániel?
Yes, as a matter of fact, Zsuzsanna already mentioned that the opposition could overcome this fragmentation, and also Jobbik joined this coalition of opposition parties, which was a success story in 2019. During the municipal elections, it worked. This broad coalition of opposition forces. So this is something which is, so to say, the magic weapon of the opposition. And if this won't work, then what could work against the Fidesz? What kind of strategy? What could they do if this broad coalition cannot beat the government, and it can't have enough vote to change the governments? And this is very probably this will cause kind of a credibility crisis for opposition voters. They're going to be very dissatisfied with the results, and we're going to have in 24 an EP election, which could change the political landscape on the opposition side. Well, I think it's going to change the landscape independently from the election results, because if they are in the government, there's going to be this dominance struggles of the opposition, or between opposition parties, is going to continue independently from if they are in government or not. But very probably opposition voters going to be dissatisfied. These voices which are claiming to change not just the government, but also to change the oppositions, these going to be louder. And since Péter Márki-Zay is the prime minister candidate who he posed himself, his self-image was to be an outsider, not to come from the old opposition elite, but he is going to be also lose the chances to to being someone who is going to change the opposition, who can give a new momentum for the opposition. So, but I think that also the voters are they also perceiving this the stake of this election, and this could give, as a matter of fact, it could give more opportunity for the opposition, because we also see this in the opinion poll data, that many voters, they think that the Fidesz already built up a deep state, that this is something which is kind of a one-party system. And I think for the opposition voters, it's obvious if they want to break this rule of the Fidesz regime, then they have to vote now for the opposition, because if the opposition fails at this election, then the Fidesz will very probably continue until 2030. So the stakes are high. I think the voters also feel that, and it's paradoxically it can create an opportunity for the opposition, because it also means that for a lot of voters, it's not just an ordinary election, but it's a referendum if they want to live in a Fidesz regime in the upcoming decade or not.
Thank you so much. Piotr Sula, would you like to ask your question live? No. Okay. Yes.
Yeah,
Please go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
I'm Piotr Sula. I'm Polish. I'm from Wrocław University. So I would like to ask you, whether you suppose or not if the elections might be framed, might be distorted, because I didn't. Maybe I missed some of the points you raised, but in Poland we are uncertain about not only how equipped our government is with, let's say, different instruments to win the elections, to defeat the opposition, but we are also uncertain about, let's say, if they are not willing to distort, to frame the election. So I'm curious, what is your opinion on future development of in this respect in Hungary?
Thank you very much. Well, who should reply? I guess Dániel again. You or Botond? Would that be within your? No, Dániel, go ahead.
I think Ágnes can also comment on this. So I don't think that it's going to be directly framed. There are more sophisticated instruments to influence the results of the election. I think which is most important, Ágnes also mentioned it, the media, that they're centralized, and actually the Fidesz can directly govern the media, not just the public broadcasters, but also the media which are in the hands of government-friendly owners or oligarchs. And also we can see that some independent media outlets, they also have similar message what the government has, and this is actually, I think, more important. One of the most important tools for the government to influence the results, the end results, and also they are using state money, and they're using actually the communication budget of the state to spread the Fidesz message. We have the billboards everywhere. There's the slogan, Hungary is going forwards, not backwards. This is the very same slogan what the Fidesz candidates are using. So basically, I think this is more important than, directly intervene during election day. I don't know, Ágnes, if you agree.
Yes, I completely agree with you. It is absolutely important that it is not possible to differentiate the Fidesz messages and the government messages. So they have the absolutely same messages, and even the creative elements are quite the same. So it means an absolutely unfair situation because, of course, the opposition parties have much less possibilities to advertise. On the one hand, they have financial limitations. On the other hand, they cannot reach different kind of channels. For example, the outdoor market, I mean the big posters and billboard and so on. It is absolutely captured by the Fidesz. So I agree with Dániel that the direct intervention and the typical forms of election fraud is not really. I think it is not the real danger, but there are some tricks, and the election result can be somehow influenced, and the unbalanced and unfair media market is absolutely dangerous.
Ágnes, just a short question to you. When we spoke about this event, I asked you, are there any public debates on any media, you know, where you have 2 or 3 sides discussing issues? And you said no.
Yes, and it is not because of the media. I mean, there are several media outlets that are absolutely open for debates, for organizing debates, but basically the government politicians are not willing to participate in these situations. Probably there will be debates on lower levels, so there will be individual candidates who will be willing to participate, but it is already almost sure that the Prime Minister himself is not willing to have a debate or to participate in the debate with the candidate. So it is not a media problem in Hungary, it is the problem of the political culture.
But does that mean that Orbán, since Dániel made this distinction between Orbán and Fidesz, Orbán is so sure of himself that he doesn't have to present his ideas or defend his ideas, you know, against the other candidate?
Yeah, it is a good question. So Orbán is extremely popular, but Orbán is not willing to participate in this kind of situation. And it is not purely about the election campaign and debate, but he is not willing to give an interview to an independent journalist. And it says a lot. So he gives interviews only to propagandists, and it is not the same situation. I think he's not there to go there and to get direct questions, and it is this situation would be rather new for him after a long decade, and so it is absolutely ironic because his voters see him as a strong man, as a brave man, as a big European politician, and so on. But he is never challenged by real questions. So I think he wants to keep his prestige and his ideology, or this kind of very special picture as a strong man, and he doesn't want to destroy this picture.
Thank you very much. We have a question in the chat that goes directly to Botond. Heinz Miko is our former partner. He was the spokesperson of the European Commission in Austria. So Botond, do the debates and judgments on the EU level as regards the rule of law play any role in the election debate? Botond.
Yes, excellent question. The issue has been brought in also by the government side for the last months continuously. Orbán offers these sort of, well, as Ágnes described, friendly interviews every Friday morning. And he has been talking about it very much, and he was anticipating the negative results of the court decision already weeks ahead. So he was preparing his own electorate for the decision. Having that said, in the government narrative, this has been clearly articulated for even the last years. You know, the anti-Brussels campaign has been very visible, very present, and very much rallying a core group of Fidesz electorate successfully, which did, I mean, but if you still look at Eurostat, and it's funny because it shows how much it depends on the question you ask in public polls. In Eurostat, you don't see a very steady drop of EU support, so it's still above EU average in Hungary when the population is asked outside of the current political domestic context about the relationship to the EU. Now, secondly, what was downplayed by the government media, and I didn't really see, but Ágnes and Dániel might correct me as well as Zsuzsa, I didn't really see from the opposition side much follow-up either, was the first letter of the European Commission sent to the government regarding the rule of law procedure. If you recall, just in a footnote, that was the big debate whether this is already the commencement of the procedure, which the Commission denied, but from the government interpretation, this was even preempting the court decision and not waiting for it, which means that the government has received a very long, more than 10-page long letter by the European Commission asking about investors' name and EU grant receivers' names, names of natural persons in and around, for example, the Lake of Balaton and in different areas where EU grants were targeted in the last years, allegedly trying to look at corruption risks. So this is very, very clear that the Commission is not releasing the funds on corruption risks, which is a very different situation to Poland, where we talk about the threat to the independence of the justice. So I'm not seeing this present enough in the media discourses, if that's my short reply to the question. One very short comment, Mirjana, on what you said, that actually the militarization of the government campaign is a very real risk. Orbán has been using this language anyway for a long time, using military expressions for civilian campaign messages. And I think they will certainly use the war in Ukraine to rely on more local communications showing government strongmen. There is one thing to watch for, and this is when and whether in what context they will mention Kárpátalja. So the Hungarian name for the Hungarians' habited part of Ukraine, called Kárpátalja, was creating havoc in 2014 when it was mentioned. And it was interpreted by other sides as if Hungary at any point was alluding to retake any territories, whether there is a revanchism or any territorial claim behind this. I don't think this is a real threat. Still, it will show what's the real stance of the government on the conflict. I'm also quite sure that there will be provocations, as it was the case in the last 1-2 years, that Russian secret services allegedly attacked Hungarian party outspots of the Ukrainian Hungarian party. This might become a very different level with the Russian occupation or invasion of the country, and the reactions must be, I believe, made more clear by the Hungarian government. So how this narrative will be shaped is extremely important in understanding what the government would do after April. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Zsuzsa?
I have two comments, and one refers to this question of whether the rule of law mechanism influences the election outcome or not. It's difficult for both sides. I mean, for Orbán, for the government party, it's obviously a shame. I mean, it is a problem for them. It's not very easy to communicate it very well. And as Botond said, it was already introduced as a kind of, punishment, a sanction. that it was contextualized by the government, but it's not something that they want to speak too much about. That the other thing, I mean, when the court decision came out, there was only one short government press conference, and not questions were allowed. It was really, left short. For the opposition, it's also not very easy, because when there's a sanction on financial sanction, that is it's very easy to translate it as something against the people. So it's not very convenient for the opposition parties to stand, though most of them obviously agrees and very glad that the EU is finally taking seriously its own rules and fundaments. But it's just difficult to speak about this, that the EU should do something, because actually the opposition's job is to convince the Hungarian voters that they have to vote for them. So incorporating international support of any kind is a different thing. So I think that there is less influence on the election outcome. However, it has very important consequences on Hungary, and especially if Orbán would win again, this is an issue that can really put Hungary to a different box within the EU, I think. Another comment is probably we didn't speak, and it's about the potential fraud of the election. So we don't speak about that too much, because as said by my colleagues, there are so many tricks already inbuilt into system beyond media and finances, but the media, the election law itself, it's so heavily gerrymandered, and there are so many extra tricks. For example, a system which supports extra the winner, that what you can imagine that the opposition, if they want to get a simple majority at this election, they have to gain 54% of popular votes. Fidesz, however, can win with much less votes, because the majority of the parliament seats are decided in electoral districts, so it's a majoritarian system, and only a smaller part is decided on party lists. So this is a very complicated system, and this was over the time of the last 12 years distorted with lots of small changes, that it's already extremely disadvantageous for any other parties than Fidesz, actually, or any other big party. But at the moment, Fidesz is the biggest and strongest party in Hungary. So this law favors the system. And of course, the election authorities and a lot of things are in the hand of Fidesz apparatus. So obviously, there are all kinds of ways to influence. There will be OECD observers coming to Hungary, a long-term observation mission, which will be a strict thing, which we haven't had this before. But the elections in Hungary are already unfair. This is the situation. So when we speak about that, we speak within these frames. It's not a fair election in any way. And the question is whether it's free. So it's already a very questionable election.
Thank you so much. We have 2 more minutes. I have a very short and very provocative question to each one of you, and tell me yes or no. Is Hungary a democracy? Dániel.
Well, there's a huge debate in Hungary how to describe this regime. Well, it is said it's a hybrid democracy, or kind of in a gray zone between an authoritarian regime and the full democracy. I think it could be said that this is a regime which constrains liberal political rights. So it's not a liberal democracy, and this was the purpose of the government, not to have a liberal democracy. I would agree with the people who are saying, who are claiming that this system is a hybrid democracy.
Ágnes?
I think it is not a democracy in the original sense of the word, but I think it is absolutely important to understand the details, because I think it is not a simple yes or no question. It is much more complicated. So basically we hide the essence of the question if we try to give very oversimplified answers.
Thank you. And you, Botond?
Well, I have a very narrow interpretation of democracy that I use for all countries, not only for Hungary, and that is the presence or non-presence of checks and balances. Now, if you look at Hungary, it is very hard to judge, as the government had the constitutional majority for 3 terms. And this is where I'm stuck. So they had the power to replace, from the Attorney General to the last person in the Foreign Ministry, everyone over the decade they had. And they had the democratic legitimacy of the elections behind them. So it's really hard to say, but I guess the Freedom House, the corruption indexes, the media freedom indexes going down in the last years constantly show the threat and also the chance that an election might turn it in a different way.
Thank you. Zsuzsa, here there is a question, well, a very brief answer, yes or no. And there was a question of Piotr. He didn't understand why the opposition had to win 54%. Unmute yourself, Zsuzsa.
Yeah, well, I don't think we can have the time to explain now. It's because of the majoritarian profile of the system. So it's the electoral districts. And it's a winner takes all system, and this is why it comes out of this. Whether it's a Hungary or democracy or not, I mean, if democracy is that a system where the people, when they want, they can change the government, and there is peaceful handover is possible, I don't think that in actually a victory of the opposition would result to a peaceful handover in Hungary. There are lots of landmines in the system, and also I think the Fidesz political elite just would not accept a victory of another political force. So we would see very complicated situation in Hungary in both cases. Either Fidesz remains in power, this would be really a very critical, disastrous result for Hungarians and for Europe. But if the opposition wins, as it was explained, it would also be very complicated because this peaceful handover would be hard to imagine. But it doesn't mean that with this is not what we want, actually. I mean, it's just we live in an illiberal system for 12 years. So it doesn't happen from one day to another to go back to a normal European democracy.
Thank you, Zsuzsa. Thank you, Dániel. Thank you, Botond. Thank you, Ágnes. I follow the pictures I have on my screen, the sequence. Thank you for all the points you have raised. We shall also distribute this video to all the journalists who could not come today. Information is very important and more important than ever. I would, before I give the word to Ivan, who is our partner, and Daniela to close, I just want to say that we here in Concordia, we shall, in this very hard times, pay more and more attention to information. I repeat, I was a war reporter. I know how important information is, and I can assure you that the first victim of any war is truth and information. And maintaining communication and sort of trying to understand is very important. Our next event is on the 28th, on Monday. We shall have a conversation with one of the biggest experts on RT, Russia Today, who will explain to us how it works. Here there is in the chat, his name is Stephen Hutchings. He's from the University of Manchester and just did a huge study on the impact and the functioning of RT. Thank you all. And I give the word to Ivan and then to Daniela.
Thank you very much, Miriam, and thank you to Zsuzsa, Dániel, Botond, and Ágnes for a really great presentation to help us understand the situation in these very important elections on April 3rd. And may I remind you that my country, Serbia, is also holding elections on that day, so it will be an exciting day. Of course, we will all remember this day by the dramatic events of the invasion of Ukraine that began early this morning. I don't know, and it's hard to guess what kind of ramifications all this will have for Europe, for geopolitics, for the regions that we live in. But let's leave that for another time. We'll all be following. But thank you, Mirjana. Thank you for the great cooperation with Daniela and Concordia, and of course our funder Erste Stiftung.
Thank you, Daniela.
My term is only to say thank you, Ivan, for the cooperation. Thank you to the speakers for joining us and sharing your knowledge and experience. And thank you, Mirjana, for organizing all this. Goodbye.
Thank you all. Köszönöm szépen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.